Namaskar, everybody, and those of you who are watching this at home, including my mother in England, who keeps up with my life in India by watching NDTV every night and then telling me the next day everything that's going on in the city I live in and the country I live in, and I've called home for so long. The tabla of NDTV has been the soundtrack of my life, and in fact, I first said I love you to my wife, Me Too, with the NDTV soundtrack tabla in the background. I can remember the moment. And 18 years later, to be here on this stage with all of you truly is an unbelievable honor and a great, great pleasure. I am going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of the past, right up to the near future, and I hope to be able to convince you how ancient India made artificial intelligence possible and can save us from it. I'm going to start with a very short video, which has some audio, of an incredibly important moment in my life earlier this year at Mahakumbh Mela. I am right at the very heart of the Triveni Sangam, on the channel where Ma Ganga and Ma Yamuna meet with the mystical Ma Saraswati. This is the most central I've ever been in the 6 snans that I've taken here at the Sangam, this Mahakumbh Mela. It's Maghi Purnima, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world. Still true, still true. On the screen, you can see a beautiful aerial image of that Triveni Sangam. And I want to show you this because it really clearly shows you those 3 channels, those 3 rivers. You can see Ma Ganga on the top, and you can see Ma Yamuna on the left, bottom left. And there you can see in the center Ma Saraswati, the merging and the 3rd river. Now I'm going to talk to you today about 2 super trends of the 21st century. And I first identified these, recognized these, and believed in these way back in 2006, and that's why I got on a plane to India in January 2007. The first one is we live in an era of accelerating technology. And of course, when we're talking about technology today, we're all thinking AI. But there are a whole suite of other technologies which are also coming for us, and AI is just one of those. But the second most important super trend of the 21st century is the re-emergence of Indian civilization. And I believe that we are now living in the first Indian decade of what will prove to be the Indian century. And I'm going to show you a little bit of why I believe that to be the case. So first of all, let's start with how did ancient India make artificial intelligence possible? Here is a very quick summary of some of the things that you might have heard of, which are connected with this, quite literally. So some of the earliest rituals, which we're going to talk about shortly, the Vedas, the altars, they required geometry and they used algorithmic thinking. The Shulba Sutras, including Bodhayana's theorem, which predates Pythagoras' theorem. In astronomy, the work of Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta, but before him for millennia, an understanding of time using mathematics. Grammar, Panini, formal language rules, which were precursors to modern linguistics, and Chandas, Pingala, binary combinatorics. So you've probably heard of some of these, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on these because there's so much that I want to cover. But these do demonstrate, quite literally, discoveries in ancient India which went on to shape the modern world that we are all living in. So Indian ideas revolutionized European science, giving birth to the modern world. Here are some manuscripts that I was looking at earlier this summer from the 12th and 13th century, and you can see in those tables the first uses in Europe of Indian numerals, Hindu Arabic numerals, of 0, of place value, of decimals, And they absolutely caught the imagination of the intellectuals of the 12th and 13th century in England, which is where those manuscripts were made. And the table on the right is a guide to how those numbers were being used. They were being used for computing time. In fact, the word computus was used in Europe to describe the calculations required to calculate when the Easter falls, which is the most important of the Christian festivals. And it's a movable feast like many Indian religious festivals because it relies on both calculations around the moon and the sun. So those numbers were being used. Now, all of those numbers were being based on astronomical tables that were created by Brahmagupta in India, and they were centered around astronomical observations made in Ujjain. So in many of these texts in Latin and in Greek and in English, what we were finding is references to the sky as it was at the place on Earth known as Arin, or Ujjain. So when we think today about India and IST being 5.5 hours from GMT, and we think of the center of the map being 0 degrees running through Greenwich in London, the English actually thought in the 13th century, as did most of the Europeans, that the center of the world for their calculations was right here in India, in what is now Madhya Pradesh. And there's another table there. And look at that on the right. That is an astrological chart for King Stephen. And it looks just like a kundli, doesn't it? Right. Here is one of the leading experts in the world, Professor Charles Burnett. He specializes on the introduction of Arabic learning to Europe. But in the conversation we had together earlier this summer, he re-emphasized the fact that, of course, it's really Indian learning coming through the Arab world into Europe. And on the right there, you can see just how excited Europeans were with Indian numerals. This is the personification. This is the personification of Arithmetica. And you can see on her dress, there are numerals. Those are numerals which come from Brahmi, Devanagari, through the Arab world, Guba numerals, and into Europe. And on the bottom left, you see a rather, the bottom right, you have a rather unhappy chap. He's frowning. That's Pythagoras. And Pythagoras is calculating using counters, abacus counters. But on the left, you see a very happy chap. That's Boethius. And the reason why he's happy is he is using Hindu numerals. And he's able to make faster, quicker calculations as a result. So this is from 1508. The 12th century mathematization of science is the key step in the making of the modern world. We talk about the Renaissance being the 15th century. We talk about the discoveries of Newton and Leibniz. But actually, they are standing on the shoulders of giants, to quote Newton. And those giants were in the 13th and 12th century, and they were standing on giants that once stood on this soil here in India. There is a difference in the way of thinking, Greek, European, and Indian thinking in the millennia that preceded this moment. The Europeans were into something which is called axiomatic model making by modern scientists. So they believed in self-evident truths, they believed in creating a model, and then you go out and you find the data and you kind of make it fit your model, your way of understanding. So it's very easy to be logical and rational on that basis, but it isn't actually, interestingly, necessarily grounded in reality. It's grounded in a model that is then applied to reality. India specialized in something which is being called by Rodham Narasimha, fantastic Indian academic from IISc, as computational positivism, about looking at the world, looking at reality, at sat rather than asat, and interpreting it and changing your models and your computations based on that reality. And we're going to be coming back to this shortly. Here's something fun for you. All monkeys climb trees, right? I think we can agree on that. The porcupine is a monkey, right? Therefore, the porcupine climbs trees. This is a logical statement. It's an argument that makes sense. Monkeys climb trees, porcupine's a monkey, the porcupine climbs trees. There's only one problem. Porcupines don't climb trees. So although the first statement is true, the second premise is false. And therefore the conclusion is also false. But if you believe the premises and you follow the logic, then you come to the conclusion that porcupines climb trees. Ian McGilchrist is a fantastic psychologist and neuroscientist who looks at the difference between left and right hemispheric ways of perceiving reality and attending to the world. And he describes the left hemisphere as logical, rational, seeking order, seeing parts rather than wholes. And when someone suffers from a right hemispheric stroke, they will read this and totally agree with it. It makes perfect sense. However, right hemispheric attention is much more holistic, contextual. It's looking at relationships between things. And people who have a left hemispheric stroke, they're immediately able to work this out because their right hemisphere is able to realize, well, porcupines aren't monkeys, so this doesn't make sense. We have left and right hemispheres of our brain, as do all animals and creatures, going back to nematode worms 700 million years ago, because we need to do two things at once. We need to, imagine you're a bird, you need to choose the grain from the grit on the floor, grain, grain, eat, grit, ignore, grain, eat. And at the same time as that, make sure that a cat doesn't jump out and eat you. So the left hemisphere is focused on the task. It reaches out into the world. It masters the world. It's very powerful. The left hemisphere takes a step back, attends, and is aware, an open awareness. Indian philosophy has always looked at these differences, gods and goddesses as consorts and pairs in stories and mythology, in yoga, Ida Pingala, Sushumna. There's all sorts of references to this idea of harmony being required. And obviously that is one of the definitions of yoga. But I want to look at it in a slightly different way and apply it to artificial intelligence. So here we've got and don't worry, some of these slides are going to have more information, and I'll go through them fairly quickly and highlight the important things. So the axiomatic model making I'm suggesting is European. Computational positivism is more Indian. And let's just jump down to the porcupine example. So it accepts the axiom and concludes porcupine climbs trees, whereas computational positivism would reject the false premise based on data, based on experience. So the AI parallel, the artificial intelligence parallel, is that with aligned and constitutional systems, which is what ChatGPT, Anthropic, some of these models are doing, they can make these mistakes, whereas something that's just grounded on the data will just give you the answers in the data. So if the data's wrong, it will give you a wrong answer, but it will give you the answer that's in the data, and we're going to come back to what that means. The availability of metaphors is one of the greatest and most important reason for anyone learning about other cultures, and I would suggest especially India. So the mythology, the stories, the historical examples, the more you learn about things, the more you're able to understand other things that fit those similar patterns, and you're able to spot connections. And I've been doing that ever since I came here. My whole mind has been opened up to entirely new ways of seeing the world, and some of that is by applying stories and examples that I've learned about in India into other contexts. So the availability of metaphors is one of India's great gifts to the world. And I'll give you an immediate example of that, which you probably do know, and this is well known around the world. That's the story of the invention of chess, where the wise man tells the king, in return for teaching you this, give me 1 grain of rice on the first square, double it for each square. And that is how we can learn about what exponential means. Because the king happily gives the grains of rice, but by the time he gets into the second half of the chessboard, he ends up with a pile of rice that's 18 quintillion on the final square, bigger than the size of a pile of rice taller than Mount Everest. So there are examples of Indian stories reaching out into the world that have become more popular. And I think there's several more that would also be useful for us to help understand the world that we're living in. How many of you have heard of AI being like opening Pandora's box? Yeah, this has been a go-to metaphor used at the World Economic Forum, Chinese ambassadors in that bottom right, many a YouTube video, books. Lots of people have used Pandora's box as a go-to metaphor. Let's consider the difference between Pandora's box story and what it tells us about the Greek and therefore the European mentality towards fire, which is what Prometheus discovers, and Zeus punishes him by sending Pandora with actually it's a vase, not a box, and out of that come all of the ills of the world. And the only thing that's left in the box is hope. So let's compare that to Vedic Agni. So fire is stolen from the gods. It's about conflict and punishment. Zeus is angry. It symbolizes forbidden knowledge, rebellion, and technology. It's tragic, it's guilt-laden, feels bad about it. It's a tool for civilization and power. And Prometheus ends up becoming this ideal of the rebel scientist and the revolutionary and the rationalist. And a view of knowledge that is, fire is an example of something that's dangerous when seized from the divine. Now think back to what Agni means in India. So Agni, from Vedic thought right to the present, is invoked through ritual and mantra rather than stolen. It's about cooperation and reciprocity. It's about honoring the divine. It's about sacred consciousness, purity, transformation. It's progress, it's participation. It's a bridge between heaven and earth. And it's Agni-centric in the sense that it seemed to be a good thing, a focal point because of the illumined seers and the sacrifices, the Yajaman, who use fire as a way of communicating with the divine. It's divine when aligned with cosmic order. Completely different attitude. Here's one of my favorite metaphors, which I think is far more relevant to artificial intelligence than Pandora's box. And that is, of course, the Samudra Manthan, the churning of the ocean, a story central to the Kumbh Mela. So here we have the divine, represented by the Devas, combining forces with the Asuras, with the bad guys. And when they're churning, they're creating not just all of the beautiful things, Shri, Lakshmi, wealth, Dhanvantari, health, but they're also creating halahal, poison. And that poison needs to be regulated, needs to be dealt with. So Shiva swallows it. Parvati holds his throat. He takes that sacrifice. And then just as the Amrit, the elixir of immortality, comes out of the ocean, the Asuras snatch it, run away with it, and Mohini is required to come and distract them in order to get it back for the Devas. Think about what's going on in Silicon Valley right now. We have forces of good and evil. We have, ego and power, as well as people who want to make the world a better place, joining forces out of convenience, using money of venture capitalists, using greed, using ego, in order to create something that some people think is going to be beneficial. And when it emerges, is it going to produce good or ill? It's going to produce both. How are we going to deal with the ill? How are we going to deal with the problems it creates? Who's going to be Shiva? Who's going to drink the poison? Who's going to be Mohini? Who's going to distract and require the return of the Amrit to the Devas? Okay, a havan. Many of you, in fact all of you I'm probably guessing, have attended a havan, a wedding, an Indian wedding, or the opening of NDTV's office, I'm guessing. It's a ceremony that is part of so many of our lives. We perform havans at home. We perform them with our students when they come to India. I've been attending, I would guess many hundreds of havans over the last 18 years. And almost all of us will have seen the havan as a fire pit, a kund, which is normally square-shaped, and it's something that we sit around, okay? This is a simplified version of the actual Vedic ritual. The real Vedic rituals, when you go back to the Yajurveda and the Rig Veda, are describing something far more complex. And that's what I'm going to show you now. So the havan that we know is, there we go, is the square, okay? And it comes from a havanya. But look, there are other places, other kunds, other elements to this ritual space. So in a proper Vedic ritual, there's a Tretagni. It's 3 agnis, 3 fires. The first one is the Gahapatya. This is the householder's fire. This is where the Yajaman and his wife, the Patni, they sit and they make their offerings into the fire. And it's circular. Then the Vedi, which is the altar where all of the implements, the hardware, the tools, the ladles, all of that is kept. And offerings from the householder then go into the havan, ahavanya, where they're then offered on to the gods. And there is a third fire. The third fire is the Dakshinagni. This is the southern fire, which represents offerings to ancestors, to Pitra, and also regulation and oversight. It's protecting the entire operation. But this is only just the beginning. In the grand Jyotistomas, Agnistomas, Agnihotra is the smaller one, but you get up to Agni Chayana, Atiratam. These are piling up of fire. It goes on for 12 days. Some of these are incredibly important, long, and very, very expensive in terms of time and investment to create. And they look something like this. So you have the Traitagni, the three fires, which you still find in many homes, or some homes, in Andhra Pradesh, in Kerala, and some other parts of the country, Maharashtra. I've seen in people's homes, they actually have the Traitagni set up. But in the grand rituals, you also have a Mahavedi, the grand altar, the grand Vedi, the greatest. And that has Sadas, and it also has here, in the case of the Agni Chayana, the 12-day ritual, it has the Sayanachiti, the falcon altar, place of offering. So what begins with the householder ends up going to the gods and then ends up with this enormous offering through Agni, through the fire. So what has that got to do with artificial intelligence? Well, there are 4 kinds of priests who are involved in these rituals. The first one is the Hotri, and the Hotri recites mantras from the Rig Veda. Second is the Advaryu, who is learning from the Yajurveda. Then we have Udgatris, who are singing, chanting from the Samaveda, often mantras, but and other verses from other texts, but they're compiled into this beautiful musical Samaveda. And then finally, you have the Brahman. So the Brahman is only one of the 4 priests, and he is the expert on the Atharvaveda. What I'm about to say, I mean, the psychological worldview, the mentality of those 4 priests, of these rituals that took place where we are sitting or standing today on the banks of Ma Yamuna, here in Delhi, they are the same ways of seeing the world as are going on right now in Silicon Valley. And of course, by Silicon Valley, I mean not just California, but Bangalore, Hyderabad, Gurugram, and so on. The Hotri is reciting mantras. These are like command line instructions. It's software. It's using language to manipulate. The Advaryu, from the Yajurveda, they are the hardware specialists. They're building the servers, the chips, the GPUs. They're creating the physical matter that is manipulated using the software. The Udgatri, from the Samaveda, are like the kind of public relations, marketing, and I mean that with due respect. They are summoning the gods, the deities, to come to the ritual, to participate. And the Brahman, from the Atharvaveda, is overseeing it, oversight, regulation. I would suggest that right now, we don't have this. So the Brahman is missing. So we have conversations going on around the world. We heard it yesterday from Deloitte. We heard it from Rishi Sunak, talking about who's going to oversee what's going on with the development of AI. So that's the missing role. So the Dakshinagni, the southern fire, the protecting fire, and the Brahman, the oversight, the understanding everything that's going on, is missing. So here are the Vedic concepts I've spoken about and their modern parallels. Agni is like the computational energy, electricity, photons, quantum. Agni Chayana, the fire altar, is like the data centers, the layered geometric symbolic representations of reality that are manipulated by the Advaryus, by creating hardware, GPUs, servers, chips, data centers. The Hotris, the coders, the prompt engineers, the software specialists who are invoking algorithms with language. The Udgatris are the public communicators, the CEOs, the vision casters, people we've seen on this stage, marketing. And the Brahmans, the philosophers, the ethicists, the regulators, considering what should happen. So here are the fires. So what are the literal things that we are doing in order to build this. First off, our devices that we all have in our pockets, that this is being played through, the internet, your mobile, your iPad, your computer, in your office, in your home, they are like the Gahapatya. We are all householders offering data through our cameras, through our texts, through our messages, through our locations, through everything that we're doing with our devices. We are offering data as householders. We don't know the technology, but we use it and we're feeding it. Just like the Yajaman in the sacrifice doesn't know that he has to have, the priests have to build everything for him. He's just there to offer and do what they tell him. That's us. Then, once it has been processed through the devices, it ends up with the apps. So these are like the minor deities. So Facebooks and YouTubes, the places that are consolidating all of the data that we're offering as householders into the world through our Fires, our Kuns, our mobile phones, our Black Mirror devices. And then they are aggregating that and shifting it on to the big AI models themselves. This is the huge consolidation. This is the multi-trillion-dollar fight that is going on right now. Like different Mahavadis in the forests of northern India 5,000 years ago, people are competing for the offerings to be made at their Mahavadi, and those are the Microsofts, the Googles, the Anthropics, the OpenAIs, the Oracles, the large aggregators of all of that data coming from all of the apps, from all of the householders, from all of us. And notice that there's no regulator, there's no Dakshinagni. So here are the Silicon Valley equivalents. We now have the, oh, we've gone that. So ancient India can help us understand artificial intelligence through metaphor, through analogy, through parallels. In fact, at the core of the Vedic worldview is this idea of bandhus, of connections that can be made between people and places and priests and rituals and cosmos and celestial objects. They're all seen to relate so that you can understand one and then it helps you understand another. Arundhati Darshana Naraya, one of my favorites, but a story for another time. So how can AI that is ancient India save us from AI that is artificial intelligence? At the moment, I've just described how it created it through the discoveries that were made in India and traveled across the world, and how it can help us understand it, but how can it save it from us? So how do AI, particularly these large language models, which are the current forefront, how do they work? So the first layer is the base model. That's where all of the data is aggregated, okay? I would suggest that that's computational positivism. So that's gathering the data and you just got the data. The data is what the data is. So if the data's wrong and biased, for example, if it just says elephants are pink, elephants are pink, elephants are pink, then guess what, guys? Elephants are pink. Then you get alignment. So reinforced learning, human feedback, constitutional AI, different approaches that OpenAI and people and others are taking. That's fine-tuning. That's these teams of people sitting in San Francisco mostly, but also with offshore centers in different parts of the world. And they're creating a normative layer where they're layering values and ethics on top of that data. Axiomatic, model making, could be wrong. Maybe the model says elephants are pink. The system prompt is what most wrappers, and when you're using AI, most of them, you can either add a system prompt yourself, if you're building a system, or someone's done that in between you and the model. That's institutional, it's typically corporates. Again, if it says, pretend elephants are pink, then when the user said, what color are elephants, it will say they're pink, even if the data said they were gray. And then finally, us, the users. If you go onto ChatGPT and you give an instruction saying, I want you to pretend that all elephants are pink, the next time you say, what color elephants, it will say they're pink. Even if the system layer said, be truthful, even if the model itself had got different data. So I'm proposing something which I'm calling the law of metaphysical convergence. And this is the formula that I've created to summarize this. The probability that an intelligent system converges on a worldview that is benevolent, i.e. it has reverence for living creatures and consciousness, which I hope is what we all want from these intelligences, that increases with the quantity, the coherence, And I'm suggesting the dharmic quality of its data. And by dharmic, it doesn't necessarily have to come from Indian traditions. It can come from other traditions that are ethical. But the point is that we want data and we want models that respect life, that respect humanity, that respect all living creatures, that are peaceful, that are cooperative and helpful, harmonious. And this is how we do that. We need to swamp the AI with data. We need to build out the base model based on the largest corpus of data it doesn't yet have. And that is the tens of millions of Indian texts, Sanskrit mostly, but also Pali, Prakrit, Tamil, other languages. They're undigitized, and they are the greatest evidence and exploration of consciousness ever. Not even Harvard and MIT can compete. This is testimony and experiments with what it is to be human, what it is to be conscious, that goes back thousands of years. It's accumulated in this country and in British Museum and British Library and a few other places. And it's currently inaccessible. So all of the data from your phone, as householders with your mobiles, and they've got that. Wikipedia, Britannica, every published book, that's all in the system already. They've run out of data. Tesla cars driving around, bringing in data they know what roads look like, they know what stoplights look like, but do they know what consciousness is? That's what ancient India still has to offer. And if we can train the models on that, we could do it. Minister Shekhawati and Prime Minister Narendra Modi were at the Gyan Bharatam conference talking about the digitization of Indian manuscripts. There's a big effort going on right now, and I had the good fortune of being there. And here's an example of me finding some Hindi, there's also some Sanskrit ones, these were Hindi, in Prayagraj about Devi Mahatmya, about the Puranic texts and the Prayag texts about the Maghi Mela and the rituals that were being carried out at Prayagraj over the centuries. And on a train, third AC, from New Delhi down to Prayagraj, I vibe coded over about 5-6 hours an app which enabled me to translate Sanskrit text into English, because there was one particular text, the Trisali Setu, which is by Narayana Bhatta, who was the inspiration behind the Gyan, Kashi Vishwanath in Varanasi. He had written about the rituals of Prayagraj and Gaya and Varanasi, and the bit on Prayagraj had not been translated into English, so I built an app on the train to do that. Another text I came across was the Ganga Bhakyavali, which is by Vishwasa Devi. Have any of you heard of Vishwasa Devi? Probably not. She was a queen of Mithila, northern Bihar. She ruled in the 15th century. She was not only a female political ruler of India, but she was also an incredible Sanskrit scholar and poetess. And it was actually her work that Narayana Bhatta, a century later, used for all of the references on Prayagraj, on Varanasi, on the rituals around Ganga, Turpan, Pindan, Mundan, all of these things. She collected all of that in a text. Okay, so I'll leave you with this. Indians, right now, are also at the heart of AI. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples. This was the most important paper, Attention is All You Need, which described transformers, which is the birth of the modern large language model movement. So ChatGPT and everything that we're taking for granted now comes from this paper. And two of those people were modern Indians who have changed the world. Ashish Vaswani, who went to BITS Mesra in Ranchi, Jharkhand, and Nikki Palmer. And Nikki was self-taught in Pune because she didn't get into IIT, and she ends up changing the world with this. And of course we have Satya Nadella, Sundar Pichai. What's missing in the middle? Satyam, Sundaram, Shivam. We need the good, we need the auspicious. The quest for the truth, the quest for the beauty needs to be combined with the quest for the good. Bharat Mandapam, where we are sitting right now. I would translate Bharat Mandapam as the protective shelter of the possessors of light, the light of knowledge. One of the roots going way back for Bharat is this, the possessors of light. And it also connects to the English word bright. Which means, ladies and gentlemen, viewers at home, my mum, the future is bright. The future is Bharat. Dhanyavad, Shubh Dhanteras, and Shubh Deepavali.
Go.
Thank you so much. Folks, wasn't that outstanding?